Hello, we are Section 1, Group 4, and today we are briefing the Senator about some background information and specific issues regarding Big Pharma in order for him to successfully go about his hearing on the way in which pharmaceutical companies price their prescription drugs in the American market.
Hi, Mr. Senator. I'm John Dingle, and I'm just one person, part of a team that's going to help you travel the world of Big Pharma, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a better understanding of how we as a people interact with them and how they interact with us. And maybe you see the cons and the pros of that. I think, let's start. Beginning, I think it's helpful to just see the structure of U.S. corporations and a bit of general background on them. We see that the original intent of these corporations was to have just a group of people pulling money together to do actual public good. Meaning that when corporations first started to sprout up all throughout the U.S., their main goal was to help the people. That was their main goal, and we see that as time goes on, that intent has changed a lot. We see now corporations are just a group of people trying to earn a large, growing, sustained legal returns, money, for people that own said business. Meaning, a lot of these corporations, the majority of them, are looking to make a profit, meaning that they want to make sure that their stockholders are happy. In doing so, they have no real responsibility to the public. As I said, their main goal is just to create a profit. They want to create a profit even if it means, their customers, even the people that they're making this product for, may be put in danger. We see that corporations have become the largest institution in our generation, meaning that these corporations have so much power. And I hope that you understand by the end of this presentation how much power they have and what they can do with that power. Next, I think it's helpful just to see how these corporations are structured and function under U.S. law. Again, it's helpful, I think, to go a bit back in time, looking at the 14th Amendment, an amendment which was created in an effort to free slaves in the U.S. in the past. But this 14th Amendment, when it was ratified, actually also helped U.S. corporations. And what I mean by that is it helped these U.S. corporations be seen not really as an institution, but as an actual person or group of people. And what this does is that these corporations have human rights. And meaning under something, again, the First Amendment, is that they can spend money on political speech, which is why you see these large and big corporations feeding money to these certain political figures which they deem, which they like, or political figures that promise something for these big businesses in return. And it's very hard for these corporations to receive harsh penalties from negative externalities that may occur from their business. A lot of the times, these corporations may think that they're above the law, when in reality, if they're seen as a group of people, an actual person, they should be following it along just like you and me.
Pharmaceutical companies should not be incorporated with corporations because, as stated before, a corporation's only concern for the company is to create as much profit as possible without any of the liability that comes along with their decisions. This creates a dent in the public's trust and viewpoint on the company because they begin to question their lack of credibility and morals. Decisions will then no longer be focused on saving lives or curing diseases, and business practices such as monopoly pricing and blocking generics become more prevalent within the company.
What is the FDA? The FDA stands for the Food and Drug Administration. It is a government agency that is responsible for the regulation of food, drugs, cosmetics, and medical products. According to the FDA's website, their mission is to protect the public health by ensuring the safety, efficacy, and security of drugs, medical devices, and biological products. The FDA was established in 1906 when the Federal Food and Drugs Act was passed. How are drugs approved in the United States? Drugs in the United States are approved by the FDA drug approval process. This process has the steps of preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, new drug application, and post-approval. In the preclinical stage, this is where the drug is tested on animals for toxicity. Based on the results presented, the FDA can approve the investigation of new drug application. In phase 1, the drug is given to only healthy humans to determine its safety. The drug is given in various doses and the side effects are determined. In Phase 2, the drug is given to unhealthy people, who are presumably the ones who would need the drug, and it is to determine safety. In Phase 3, the drug is tested on people to see its efficacy and if it does what it claims to do. These people are compared to a control group who are just given a placebo pill to determine the effectiveness of the drug. If the drug is shown to be safe and effective compared to the placebo, it will be able to be put on the market. Once the drug is marketed, more people will be taking it than had in the trials, and with that, more information about how the drug works and its side effects will come out. In this post-approval process, the drug label can be changed or the drug can be removed off the market. Are there issues with the FDA that the senator should be aware of? One of the issues with the FDA that the senator should be aware of is that the FDA does not gather data or run any of their own trials. This allows pharmaceutical companies to basically give whatever data they pick and choose to give to the FDA. As the pharmaceutical company's end goal is to make as much money as they can, this allows them to put forth the trials they see to be fit to get the drug approved and on the market. Also, in Phase 3 of the drug approval process, the effectiveness of the drug is compared to a placebo, which is basically a sugar pill. If the drug shows any sort of effectiveness compared to no effect at all, it is basically considered to be an effective drug. Another issue is the complete response letter that the FDA will write to the pharmaceutical company if their drug is not approved the first time. This letter tells the company exactly what data the FDA did not like and what to take out of their proposal to get the drug approved. The drug company can then alter their data and resubmit the application with all of the corrections and false information necessary to get the drug approved.
Moving on, what exactly is Phase 2? In Phase 2, the researchers determined the drug safety in unhealthy patients. This is important to differentiate because it is the main variance between Phases 1 and 2, as Phase 1 looks at determining drug safety in primarily healthy patients. Phase 2 determines this through clinical trial testing and utilizes a larger group of participants than Phase 1. In clinical trials, the participants are separated into two groups, the placebo and experimental groups. This is done through random selection. Then, the researcher will either provide the participant with the placebo drug or the actual drug and monitor them over a predetermined period of time. Based on the results they gather, the drug will either move on to Phase 3 for further testing and approval, or will have to be reevaluated. The clinical trials include a larger sample size of 100+ participants and have the main purpose of determining the side effects and safety of the drugs in unhealthy patients. A question that commonly arises is, should drugs be approved directly after Phase 2? So, to quickly recap the main purpose of each phase, Phases 1 and 2 focus on drug safety, while Phases 3 and 4 look specifically at the reactions and efficacy of the drug. In this scenario, efficacy is defined as the ability for the drug to serve its intended purpose and how well it does so. Based on this, we believe that drugs generally should not be approved directly after Phase 2. The FDA estimates that 3 to 8% of drugs are lost between each phase. This leads us to believe that the drugs will not be fully safe for public use unless they undergo the complete drug testing. Additionally, as Phases 3 and 4 are the ones that look specifically at the efficacy of the drug, we as consumers cannot be guaranteed that it will be serving its intended purpose. The only exception we believe could be made to this scenario is if the patient is in terminal care and requires the medication as a variance of compassionate use. However, this topic is still being currently debated, as it is not fully known whether it is ethical to provide a patient in terminal care with a medication that cannot be fully guaranteed to be safe or work its intended purpose. If you look to the left, we have included a figure retrieved from the New York Times that further illustrates the large amount of loss between each phase of drug testing. Additionally, the New York Times believes that less than 10% of drug trials are ultimately approved, which only further supports our claim that it would not be fully safe to approve a drug directly after phase 2. Who exactly is liable if the FDA makes a mistake? So, the FDA is located under the federal branch of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. However, neither corporation often gets held accountable for mistakes due to the vague definition of the term. Along with this, the FDA themselves cannot get sued. As a result, many times the individuals are the ones that are held accountable and punished for the errors, not the corporations. These individuals can include the pharmaceutical companies, researchers, or research groups. However, this varies depending on what location they are located in. Along with this, the punishments vary based on the level of infringement, ranging from a small fine to possible loss of research funding or paying a larger lawsuit.
So first we'll start off with what is IP. IP stands for intellectual property, which can be any creative or artistic idea that a person comes up with and covers pretty much anything you could think of. A patent can then be filed on this intellectual property. So a patent is a property right given to the inventor of a new, not obvious, and useful invention. This basically means that this invention has to be new and it can't be obvious to like people who are experienced within the field, and it cannot take away from what the public already has access to. And a patent can also be filed on an improvement of a previous invention. It just has to be new and different enough that it is worth patenting. The owner of that patent has the right to make, use, or sell his or her invention for 20 years after filing the patent. Patent rights are also territorial, which basically means that a person has patent protection within the jurisdiction or state which they file in. But with the World Trade Organization, patents are protected in every country that signed on to that trade agreement. So what does it have to do with pharma? In pharma, a patent typically equals product. So patents are super important because it is basically what drug companies are selling. With the large cost that it takes to produce a new pharma product, it basically means that investment in new drugs are disproportionately directed towards creating drugs for people who can afford them. And then patents within the United States can be extended for about half the time it takes to go through a drug approval process because the approval process can take up a large part of the 20 years in which a patent is protected. And it also, US patent law is special because it allows drug companies to test and develop a generic version of a patented drug so that as soon as that patent expires, the generic version can be sold and marketed. And then what is the legal structure that guides intellectual property issues? So the current global framework for this is the TRIPS agreement within the World Trade Organization. So TRIPS stands for trade related aspects of intellectual property rights. And it basically establishes a level playing field for intellectual property and patent laws by mandating that all countries who are a part of the World Trade Organization follow the same laws regarding intellectual property and patents. These are some of the major requirements for the TRIPS agreement. There must be no discrimination among different technologies and patents, so whether that's like tech or pharma stuff or even like copyrights, they all have to be treated the same. They all have to protect patents for at least 20 years after the filing date, and they must enforce intellectual property and patent law effectively, not just let people kind of ignore the patents and do whatever they want. And they must provide an equal level of rights to all patents. Are there ethical issues within pharma, and what should the US do to address these? So, because of the competitive nature of patents and a lot of the time the profit seeking motive behind them, it can lead to a disparity for who drugs are developed for, which is basically who can afford them. According to Oppenheimer, Literature on pharmaceutical patents address this need to balance intellectual property protection and access/affordability of the pharmaceutical medications. And basically, this is talking about how there's a lot of debate within like the pharmaceutical area and the ethics involved in it on how do you balance funding and the need for a profit margin on drugs and making sure that life-changing medications are available for people who need them. And you can kind of see that in the graph to the right is it's a graph of the amount of new molecular entities, which is basically like drugs, versus the GDP of these countries. And so you can see that countries with higher GDPs or wealthier countries tend to produce a lot more drugs and new molecular entities. And this is because there's more funding for them in these countries, and patients are more likely to be able to afford the resulting drugs or therapies. And this also results in the fact that there are more drugs developed for diseases that are experienced in wealthier or first world countries, and because more people are going to buy them and use them, whereas diseases that are more prevalent in impoverished countries, there aren't a lot of drugs that are actually developed to treat these diseases. So you see a lot of disparity based on who can afford them, like afford drugs, rather than who truly like needs them the most.
So what are the reasons that drug prices are so high in the United States? When this question is asked to the pharmaceutical companies, you are typically going to see one answer given: research and development, R&D. If you ask what is the average cost to develop drug, they state that is around $800 million. There are many issues with this number that they have come up with, and we will discuss a few of them on the next slide. The other reason is that prices are so high in the United States is because the current U.S. patent system that protects competition between drug companies for 20 years. The result of this lack of competition is that the owner of the patent is able to set the price of the drug wherever they want, and people still have to buy it if they need it for treatment. Obviously, it is a medication for a headache. People are not going to be willing to pay $50 or $100 for a pill. But if the medication is to prevent transplant rejection or something that is going to save their life, they're going to be willing to pay $100 or more a pill. As I said before, the number one justification that pharmaceutical companies provide when asked why the drugs are so expensive is the cost of R&D. However, when we look into these numbers, we see that the drug companies do not spend anywhere close to $800 million that they claim as the average cost to develop a drug. Instead, we see that they spend around 4% of their income on research and development of new drugs. This is much less than what they spend on marketing, administration, and is dwarfed by their profits. If a relatively small amount of money is being spent on R&D, where are the new drugs coming from? To understand this question, we need to look at the Bayh-Dole Act that was passed in 1980, which allowed universities to patent their findings rather than having information available to the public. The universities can then license their patent to pharmaceutical companies who can carry out a much smaller amount of research to optimize the drug, rather than having to do all the initial R&D themselves. So what we see is that taxpayer money flows to the NIH and other organizations that fund the initial research and development. Once they have gotten to a point where the drug is developed enough for a patent, drug companies pay for the license, optimize the drug, and push it for FDA approval to then sell the drug for profit. So basically, the public is funding the research and development of the drugs, which the pharmaceutical industry turns around and profits from. For example, the research and development of HIV drugs was around 75% funded by governmental organizations from all over the world. So the cost of R&D was very little for the pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies also will patent the same drug multiple times for different purposes, which further extends the duration that they have a monopoly over their drug price. Lastly, the question is if medical advancement will be jeopardized if we lower drug prices. In my opinion, there's definitely room to lower drug prices without impacting the development of medicine. The reason that I argue this is because we have seen that the major financial contributor to drug development is not the pharmaceutical company, it's the taxpayer. So if we reduce the amount of money that is made by the pharmaceutical company, it will have less of an impact than if we reduce the amount that the taxpayers supply. I might even take it a further step to argue that reducing the cost of drugs would not reduce the amount of R&D that pharmaceutical companies can contribute. This is because they already spend as little money as possible in R&D by paying public institutions for their findings and then profitizing it. So if they have already placed as little funding into R&D as possible, I don't see a way in which decreasing their profit margin would decrease the amount of funding they place in R&D. And thus the advancement of medicine would not be jeopardized. They would have less money to spend on advertising, political contributions, and other expenses that have little effect on the advancement of medicine. So I raise the question, is there any risk at all with reducing the cost of drugs? And if so, are those risks worth crippling the effects of inflated drug prices that we currently see within the US?